In early 2025, a woman named Rachel Waters went to hospice with her mother, expecting support, guidance, and care at the end of life. And she was, of course, dealing with end of life with her mother. Tough enough, right? But
Uh-huh.
instead, after her mother died, she was indicted on 2 counts of murder. Crazy.
Yes. We can't even imagine
Yeah.
what that
Yeah.
is like as a lived experience. But overnight, Rachel's grief turned into a criminal case. Private family decisions were pulled into the public eye, and a situation that many families quietly face suddenly became something people were afraid to talk about. On this episode, this is not about sensational headlines or assigning blame. It is about what happens at the when end of life care intersects with the legal system and how easily families can find themselves unprepared for that collision.
We're talking today with Rachel about what she lived through, what she learned, and how her experience reshaped her into an advocate for patients and families navigating hospice and end of life care. Because this story isn't just about one case, it's about what families deserve to understand before they ever need hospice and how they can manage these kind of things. And it's an
Uh-huh.
incredible story. So, welcome to this episode of End of Life Conversations. Welcome, everybody. I am the Reverend Wakil David Matthews. Today, we are really intrigued to hear Rachel Waters' story. Rachel made headlines in 2025, early 2025, when she was when she was indicted on 2 counts of murder following her mother's hospice death in Columbia County, Georgia. Facing charges so severe they carried the possibility of the death penalty, Rachel's life was upended overnight. We're going to let her tell us more about this devastating and really amazing story.
It's a both and story, yes. And I am the Reverend Mother Ana Luisa Armendariz. Rachel's legal ordeal and personal experience transformed her into a passionate advocate for patients and families navigating end of life care. Rachel now works to spotlight systemic gaps in hospice practices and pushes for caregiver protections so that other families and their loved ones are not left vulnerable. Rachel grew up in Georgia and now lives in Sunnyside, Queens with her 2 husbands and their beloved kitties. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're glad to have you. Yeah, we kind of set the ground, if you will, by just finding out when you first were aware of death in as far as in your life.
Oh, in my life.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Um, you know, from a very young age, I think I grew up in rural Georgia, but I was so fortunate in that I had my maternal grandparents who lived next door to me
Mhm.
growing up, to me and my mom and my father at the time. They were still married. And there were a lot of neighbors around who were around my grandparents' age that were sort of like extended family.
Uh-huh.
And the first one who passed, um, Daddy Bill and Adeline. I remember when Adeline passed when I was 6 years old. I saw open casket funeral, and that was when I was really struck by loss and the impact of that loss, and
Mhm.
how uncanny it was. The difference between her as a living person versus this almost unrecognizable figure in the
Mm.
casket.
Mhm.
And, after that, I sort of developed that existential fear of my grandparents dying, of my mom dying. I Even before I was a teenager, I used to cry to my mom and say, "Why did you have me so late? Why don't I have siblings? You're gonna die and I'm gonna be all alone." I would get so upset about
What?
it.
Wow.
Um, and then, I had a great deal of experience with death. My grandfather, who was like my dad, died when I was 17. My grandmother followed at 20. When I was 20, my mom and I were her caregivers in the last 3 years of her life. She had end-stage diabetes, and it was one reason I went to college close to home too, so I could stay close to her and give her insulin injections and take care of her before my mom got off work in the
Mm.
evenings. And so I've been very close to it, had a lot of losses, both pets, loved ones, friends. Um, my half brother David committed suicide a few years ago, shortly before my mom's death. So it's been a lot of death. And I have had many years to come to terms with and process it. In fact, it was all those losses that sort of led me to turn to Buddhism when I was 11,
Mm,
and this understanding of suffering as a normal and natural condition of life
yeah.
and, loss, and the acceptance of that loss,
Mhm.
which has sort of enabled me to be resilient through those things despite the fact that the grief is always horrible no matter how much you are exposed to it.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
so true, so true.
Wow. So, one thing you and my daughter have in common is that she constantly cries too about, "Why'd you have me so late? I want you to live forever. I'm gonna Thelma and Louise it with the day you die because I can't let stand to not live without with like, in a
Yeah.
world without you." So, I hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the only child predicament especially. It's just like,
Right.
"You all I have," you know?
Yeah, yeah, it is actually an interesting, like, existence, right? To be an only child. But you actually touched, a little part of this thread about how death has impacted the story of where you are today. So, continue with your journey, like, tell us more.
Yeah, I think, as part of coping with loss, and especially when my mom got sick in 2020. She had a really rapid plummet. She was, sort of cognitively and physically normal in January of 2020, which was the last time I saw her before August 2020. So you have the lockdowns, you have the pandemic. I would have actually seen her in March, but she had a really rapid decline from being cognitively and physically normal to her entire spinal column collapsing due to osteoporosis. Probably the early stages of multiple myeloma then, because the bone lesions appeared in the spine and weakened the bone,
Mhm,
as well as the start of Alzheimer's. It's the prodromal stage that we call mild cognitive impairment. And I started recognizing signs of that in mom. And very quickly, I realized two huge things about my life. I knew that I needed to immediately jump into action to try and delay the progression of all of the illnesses that she was facing.
Mm,
Um, but I also knew that I needed to adjust my career in such that I
mm,
had the emotional wherewithal to channel all of my energy into what I knew was going to be a mighty battle with my mom. So I was originally working in the nonprofit sector. I worked a lot with formerly homeless and incarcerated people,
mm,
um, very emotionally taxing areas for work where you're feeling distressed all the time. And
mhm,
I realized that I needed a big career shift, to focus on something that was more hopeful
mm,
and hopeful for the futures of people like me and my mom. We share the Alzheimer's gene, which is ApoE4, as well as multiple myeloma, which is cancer. Not at the time. My mom hadn't been diagnosed yet, but it was sort of like any illness that would be terminal.
mhm,
And so I made a big career shift to life sciences and medical writing, where I got to be sort of at the
huh,
forefront of innovation that would save people's lives and extend it and sort of translating what those innovations were for
mhm,
investors, for clinicians, and patients. And it really led me to a career that I found really restorative and hopeful and enabled
mhm,
me to channel even more of that energy while also, research was my full time job. Medical research became my full time job,
mm.
enabling me to be a better and more robust advocate for my mom as
Yeah,
she neared the
mhm.
end of her life.
yeah, yeah, beautiful.
That is amazing to be, like, swept into this world where everything that gives you hope is actually transforming the lives of others and your mom.
Yeah, yeah, what a
Yeah.
great deal. What a great thing.
Yeah.
Well, we wanna hear the story, not only what happened because that's obviously the way you showed up
Mhm,
here, but also, how that's affected what you're doing now what talk more about what you are working on and what your
Yeah.
goals and objectives are for now.
Yeah. The abridged version of what happened with my mom, as she neared the end, I'll sort of give you a rundown of these illnesses and decline that really started piling up. So, my mom had this relatively mild, I say relatively, because my mom had been an electronics and satellite engineer all her life.
Oh,
So if there is even the slightest drop, she's the person who did everyone's taxes in the family. You see it. And we talked on the phone every day. We texted every day.
mhm,
We saw each other 4 times a year. And so when noticed a shift in her ability, her grasp of grammar, her vocabulary, she started reversing all pronouns. That was one of the earliest signs.
Mhm.
Huh.
She had a variant logopenic primary progressive aphasia,
Mm.
which is an unusual way for Alzheimer's to present, but it basically is they're still able to think of what they want to say in their mind. It's just the correct words escape them.
Mhm.
And I recognize that being familiar with the disease process because as soon as I found out we had the gene back in 2017, I did
Mhm.
years of research
Mhm.
looking into how it could manifest.
Mhm.
And I was hyper vigilant and I knew that's what was going on.
Mhm.
However, my understanding of the disease was that it was very slow. And in fact, when I spoke to my mom's primary care doctor, she said, Rachel, I know you're rushing to get care and all this stuff, but you're honestly years away from that. They
Mhm.
normally linger in this phase 5, 6, 8 years, before you need to
Mhm.
think about it. So you've got time.
Mm.
And I really held on to this idea that I had time. And yet, every couple of months, we would have this huge stepwise decline
Mm.
in
Mhm.
cognition. And it seemed to
Mhm.
go hand in hand with her collapsing spine. She was starting to lose a ton of weight. In that 8-month period from January 2020 to August 2020, she had aged 15 years
Wow.
and 8 months.
Mhm.
She was almost unrecognizable when I got to her. Um, and
Mhm.
that was a lot of the physical toll of, being in so much chronic pain with the osteoporosis.
Mhm.
So the first thing, we jumped into treatment for osteoporosis. I tried to alert the family to Alzheimer's. There was a lot of denial there, and I won't speculate on all the reasons for it. But I didn't exactly have care partners in the family.
Mhm.
In
Mhm.
fact, there was a lot of suspicion, this belief that maybe I was being hyperbolic or trying to
Mhm.
push for my mom to be declared incompetent in some way when I
Mhm.
started talking about things like power of attorney.
Mhm.
Um, and that became very much an uphill battle. But when it comes to caring for someone I love, I'm pretty, relentless in,
Uh-huh.
pushing forward.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And I was lucky that I had friends of my mom's who did vouch and advocate, like, yeah, we think something is really happening and we're going to talk to her while she's still cognitively able to grasp it. And
Mhm.
I was lucky in that I was able to secure power of attorney. And my mom had always wanted me to have that. She just needed to know it wasn't like a conservatorship, right? Where I was going to suddenly like seize her assets or control of her life,
Uh-huh.
I think was a lot of the fear my family had. But I was lucky that I did because very soon after, within about 6 months, she had a significant enough decline that it became clear we needed some outside help.
Mm.
And I had committed to keeping my mom in the home as long as possible.
Mhm.
And we were in a weird situation where my mom's retirement income, never mind her assets, in terms of homes, but her retirement income was too high to qualify for Medicaid.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
any kind of in-home care, it was on me to hire, and
Mhm.
I was lucky that my husband was able to support me while I could channel my income into hiring help. And we, sort of continued to escalate that help as her needs grew, and boy, did they grow rapidly.
Mm.
And it really came to a head in the summer of 2022 when she finally received the diagnosis of multiple myeloma. We went with a monoclonal antibody therapy. We knew by that time her Alzheimer's was full blown. Chemotherapy would not have been something she could withstand or understand, putting her through the illness and side effects.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, when you can only pursue one type of therapy, that tends to fail quickly.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so in December of 2022, my mom's oncologist said, I think at this point we should look at hospice. She's now entering sort of the end stages of multiple myeloma and it's accelerating. It fed into the Alzheimer's because these are all
Mhm.
inflammatory processes.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Um, Poor nutrition, pain, inflammation, it all accelerates the process. And so in the span of 3 years, we essentially went from mild cognitive impairment to stage 6A or 7 or 6B of Alzheimer's disease, which is right at the very end,
Mhm.
along with end-stage cancer. And at that point, even round-the-clock care in the home was no longer viable because the home itself was no longer a safe place for her. I
Yeah.
cared for her in the home, me and my husband's. We actually took turns with paid caregivers,
Mhm.
caring for her until we realized, "Oh my god, she can't be in a home that has upholstery that can't be sanitized appropriately, right, for
Mhm.
accidents or um, things that you never imagined that they would do or, use can become a weapon that can hurt them, and it's just impossible to stay on top of it.
Mhm.
And so at that point, we made the very difficult decision to move my mom into a memory care facility. And that was in March of 2023. So she'd already been on home hospice. And it's worth noting that when people go into home hospice in this country, this is a nationwide practice. Family caregivers are prescribed something called a comfort care kit.
Mhm.
And that comfort care kit includes things like sublingual morphine, lorazepam or another type of benzodiazepine, anxiety
Mhm.
medication, suppositories for constipation. And you're trained on when and how to use these things in the
Mhm.
event that you don't have a hospice care professional immediately available to administer them.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
And you think nothing of it because, we had hospice nurse friends too, and it's like, yeah, everybody's given these. Everybody's
Mhm.
trusted and
Mhm.
expected to administer them. And at that time, I thought there was maybe a specific law protecting the use or the administration or monitoring of it. And I was really surprised to find that no one really monitored or seemed to measure those medications. It was very,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and so I was really scared to ever even touch them, even when
Mhm.
mom was
Mhm.
having a hard time with pain or anxiety. I felt, sort of unmoored in that I'm very cautious from a medical perspective because with dementia, especially, you never know if you're going to make something worse.
Right.
Mhm.
If they're going to
Mhm.
have a fall or if it's going to lead to more confusion.
Mhm.
And so I
Mhm.
was really relieved with her going into memory care because you have some trained medical
Right.
staff that are sometimes there. It's not, it's still considered a residence. It's not a nursing home, right? It's
Mm.
assisted living, technically, is the legal designation. So they're still on home hospice. They don't change the type of hospice that they have.
Mhm.
But you theoretically have partners in administration and care.
Yeah.
Um, and, when she entered the facility, that was a load off in one sense,
Mhm.
but in another, it introduces new layers of bureaucracy and uncertainty too.
Hmm.
Um, and one of those was, we had a lot of difficulty with mom in terms of determining what was a behavioral issue and what was a pain issue.
Mm.
And, that sort of created conflict both between me, home hospice, and the memory care facility because the response was often antipsychotic medications being
Mhm.
suggested, sometimes very strongly suggested. And that did not seem appropriate necessarily because a lot of
Mhm.
what she was feeling seemed to be rooted in pain.
Mhm.
And we have an issue in this country. It's relatively common that people with Alzheimer's tend to get less pain management than people who don't have it.
Hmm.
Huh.
Interesting.
Um, and it's partly because pain doesn't necessarily manifest in the same ways. It can be, an outraged
Yeah.
behavior rather
Mhm.
than a clear articulation of, I'm in pain, I need this
Mhm.
thing.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
at that point, it becomes the responsibility of the power of attorney and family caregiver to advocate vigorously on behalf of their loved one to ensure that those needs are being met.
Sure.
Mhm.
And I am not a shrinking violet when it comes to advocacy. um, my mom advocated so intensely for me throughout my life.
Mm.
Mhm.
Um, that was how I was raised. It's like, come
Mhm.
hell or high water, I will fight
Yes.
for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
Hmm.
and a lot of my mom's issues, were rooted in pain, like her attempts to they were alleged attempts to commit suicide. I still have some doubt about them, but, she would be found with the call cord around her neck, and she often screamed that she wanted to kill herself and she wanted to die. But if you're in excruciating agony from bone pain, like, yeah, that
Mhm.
might be how you feel.
Sure.
Mhm.
Um, and so there was a lot of, you know, I think from the start, that became clear that pain management would be an issue, simply because of the way the systems are structured,
Mhm.
right? It's not even leveraging like personal fault. It's just, you are also dealing with corporate systems that are legally cautious and understandably so.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, that, it adds new layers of complication to home
Right.
care, but you're still on home hospice and you still bear the responsibility
Mhm.
of being the one to
Mm.
say yes or no and to manage,
Mm.
their pain and or behaviors.
That's insane too because it's like you're home hospicing and then you're in this institution, right?
Yep,
And there's, like, the constant,
Yeah.
like, they're working with, multiple people who are probably having similar things, and
right.
you're just like, "Mom needs this."
Right.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
difficult.
Um,
Mhm.
and and that, I think that was where a lot of the issues I think arose in communication is it unfortunately when you have a parent that is more behaviorally difficult,
Mhm.
you yourself, seem like the enforcer when you come in because you're like, "No, this is not the best medication. This is the
Mhm.
approach that maybe we should try."
Mhm.
And so I cannot say that I was a very popular person, and I came down a lot. Toward the end of my mom's life, I spent essentially 4 months straight, in Georgia,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
if I came back to New York, it was like 2 weeks in New York, 2 weeks there, spending
Mhm.
half of every month,
Wow.
Mhm.
um, to keep close tabs on things, but also because my mom wouldn't remember me, if I she remembered who I was, but she would think that 2 weeks was years and that I had been gone for years,
Yeah.
and I
Mhm.
hated leaving her with that feeling. That was torture.
Mm.
Mhm. Huh.
And unfortunately, I had last seen her in late June when I got a call on July, 9th from Hospice as they were coming to do their weekly visit. Actually, I believe the memory care facility, called Hospice. My mom, I was told on the phone, and I was here in New York, that my mom had been found doubled over, non-responsive, and had been declared actively dying, and she had hours to days to live, and I needed to get down immediately if I wanted to be by her side. I I cannot tell you the stress of getting down there. We ended up having basically the storm of the century here in New York shut down all the
Oh,
airports.
jeez.
Oh my god.
We had 2 flights in a row canceled.
Uh,
And so my husband David and I booked a train ticket to DC and then ran from the train station to a taxi to catch a flight with 35 minutes to
Oh,
spare
jeez.
to Augusta, Georgia.
Oh my god.
And when we arrived, my mom was indeed totally non-responsive except for she appeared comatose, eyes partially open, not speaking, which she had been speaking last time I saw her. Her fingers and toes were already turning black, because her oxygen saturation, which was found, was around 70 odd percent. That's pretty incompatible with life.
Yeah.
mhm.
Um, but they had put her on some supplemental oxygen and brought that level up. But my mom's advanced directive stated only comfort care, no, life sustaining measures like fluids
Mhm.
or food.
Mhm.
And at that point, it's basically you have to accept what the natural dying process looks like.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's a really hard thing that I was admittedly, even with my education, not prepared for. I was not prepared for the fact that
Mhm.
someone can still be alive and their eyes be desiccated and dried
Mm,
out,
mm.
for instance,
Wow.
Mhm.
or that the inside of their mouth could crack and bleed from the lack
Mhm.
of fluids.
Mhm.
And that was, it was traumatizing
Yeah.
to see my mom
Mhm.
like that. And at that point, it became very clear to us that, yeah, they were right. Death was imminent. We had a hospice nurse friend who also came in and examined her because we were always trying to get ideas and estimations of how long she would linger in that state because it was horrifying to me, this idea that, she was suffering because she had no fluids. And it quickly became clear she had no morphine on call, which I knew was
Huh.
the standard of palliative care.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
this became especially pronounced because every time she was turned, the only responsiveness she had was to make a really agonized face. Like
Mhm.
I described it as like the Greek theater tragedy face.
Mm.
It is seared into my brain.
Mhm.
She had 2 very large bed sores on her back and behind, and I imagine those were, an immense cause of pain, as well as the fact
Yes.
that her bones were quite literally
Oof.
deteriorating with cancer
Yeah.
lesions.
Yeah.
It's one of the most painful cancers.
Mm,
And at this point, I told my husband, "God, we need the comfort care kit on us in case we
mm,
don't end up getting a prescription for morphine at the facility because, right, it's prescribed for end of life." So again, you don't think anything of it. But the first thing I wanted to prioritize, I didn't want the responsibility of that in a facility. I wanted someone with more
Yeah.
expertise. Um, was me demanding of hospice, "Look, we need morphine on call. This is a cancer patient who is
uh-huh,
dying."
uh-huh,
And that request was never filled. In fact, it was directly refused. And I was exceedingly confused by this
Yeah.
and pretty angry.
Yeah.
Um,
I've
you know,
never
I
been in a hospice situation where there's no morphine, ever,
Ever. No.
I've never heard of one.
ever.
No.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Um, the argument was that she appeared comfortable, but she was only seen for a couple of minutes at a time.
Mhm,
And so I'd started recording her too
Hmm.
because she would also experience periodic agonal breathing,
mhm,
and that's one of the indications for morphine. Um, and my mom continued to progress. So my husband and I set up shop in her room and that we had a mattress on the floor
Hmm.
and
mhm,
we were not going to leave her side because I made a promise to my mom when she got sick
mhm,
that she was not going to die without me.
Hmm.
I know that's not
mhm,
always a guarantee, but again,
mhm.
become hell or high water, I will make sure I
You'll try
keep
your
that
best.
promise.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Um, and so we were there to monitor every single change. And then on the morning of July 20th, 2023, I was awakened by the sound of teeth clashing together. Now, at this point, there's been no comfort care medication. I haven't administered anything because I'm still waiting in hopes that a prescription's going to come through, right?
mhm,
Um, but that sound is actually the sound of end stage agonal breathing, where the respiratory muscles no longer work. It's just the jaw.
Hmm.
And
mhm,
so they have this gritted face and they're smashing their teeth together in an
mm,
effort to intake air because there's not adequate oxygenation. And that's, I'm frantically Googling this stuff too,
Jeez.
what agonal breathing looks like. And I realized then, oh my God, this is exactly what calls for a comfort care kit. I need to call hospice on the emergency line. It's like 6 in the morning. There are no certified nursing staff that I was aware of at the time on the floor. They sort of work regular hours. It was just some medical assistants. They
mm,
confirmed that they still didn't have morphine there. But I let them know, well, we have a comfort kit from home and it has morphine. And the idea was to be on the up and up with everything. I'm a
mhm.
pretty rule abiding person. uh, and so I, because my husband was like, "You don't have to tell everybody everything." I'm like, "Yes, you do. You should be transparent, right?"
Yeah.
And,
Ah,
um, and so I call hospice for instruction. And, you know, I asked, "Is this legal to administer even though she's in a memory care facility?" And their allegation is one thing, mine is another. But it was my understanding that, yes, this was the exact situation that
mhm,
called for that sublingual dose. Uh, and my husband, who was there and was a witness to it, was aligned. And so we administered the comfort care medication as it was prescribed. And my mom, it didn't stop the agonal breathing. It actually didn't change a single thing. And she died anyway.
mhm,
After she died, we called, hospice came and declared her, they dressed her. Um, Everything sort of was going as expected. We went ahead and called the funeral home. We had been in touch with the funeral home since we knew she was imminently dying, just to see kind of what dates were available for family who was out of town. We knew it wouldn't be very long without water, especially. People don't
Hmm.
tend to survive more than about 3 days
mhm,
with fluids. Um, and so I had no idea that anything was untoward until, um, we were driving home from the memory care after the family had come and seen her, and we were waiting on the funeral home to pick her up, and the funeral home called, and said, "There's been a problem. We can't pick up your mom's body. It's been taken to Atlanta for an investigation." And I knew immediately that there was a murder investigation. I did not know who had alleged it or why it had been sparked. I assumed it was a misunderstanding, but instantly your brain goes from grieving daughter to fighting for your life. It
Mm,
is it is a
Yeah.
it is such a sudden shift,
mhm,
and immediately I am Googling attorneys because, that's the first thing you have to do in the area who deal with things like murder.
Mm.
And he tells me what possible charges could be in Georgia, and I'm sitting here going, "But I didn't break a law. I don't understand. Like, this is normal hospice care. What
mhm,
what the hell is going on?"
mhm,
And he said, "It doesn't matter right now. What matters is that you need to be prepared for law enforcement to show up at your mom's house and, prepared to, face whatever might come your way. But yeah, we'll hope that, they understand the situation at some point and that it'll be made clear." And sure enough, after we got back to my mom's home, law enforcement showed up, asking for my phone. I asked them to get a search warrant. I knew my rights. And they went ahead and got a warrant. They had spoken to my attorney, so they also got a warrant for the morphine from the e-kit as well. And I was like, "Okay, great. They're gonna see that it was a prescription."
mhm,
Um, and at that point, I assumed that everything would be very obvious and clear, in part because, there was a record that I was called down because she was actively dying. There was a record that
mhm,
she's actively dying. I'm thinking,
mhm,
you're gonna see the state of the body. You're going to
mhm,
as terrified as I was reassured by the knowledge that there wasn't anything shady that happened
Right.
and this
right.
this was an expected death.
Yeah.
Mhm,
Um, and things went really quiet after that and eerily quiet in retrospect. My family who I had issues with throughout mom's illness, but they had been a huge part of my life growing up, and you sort of assume that after the death you can kind of make amends. They disappeared,
Mm. Mm.
pretty much overnight.
Wow.
And I didn't know at the time that they knew anything of the investigation, but, other odd things started happening, like all the sympathy cards that came to my mom's home, none of them mentioned me. It
Mm.
was as though I never existed. These were people who knew me, but these were family friends and distant cousins, and they would say to my mom's siblings how sorry they were for the loss, but I was never named
Mm.
or addressed. And that was really strange to me too. And I would later find out that, my family had been contacted by investigators. And I still don't know to this day if my family believes that I did anything or didn't, because I've had no contact, right?
mhm,
And I was just in this sort of quiet limbo for almost a year and a half, or over a year and a half, rather, actually, um, where I was just holding out hope that the medical examiner would see everything that was wrong with my mom
mhm,
and
mhm,
that they would have all the medical records. I had, in fact, retrieved the medical records myself, because I had been, trying to find out what happened to my mom too. I didn't know why, how long she had been non responsive or who found her. I wanted to see sort of the records
mhm,
leading up to that, and I had gone through an attorney the year prior to get her medical records, and it was extensively documented by hospice that she was actively dying and that I had been called down.
mhm.
But something odd stood out to me in the hospice notes, and it was the nurse stated that I had requested euthanasia. And this was an accurate statement. I had
Mhm,
never requested euthanasia. She was
mhm,
already dying.
mhm,
And not only was she already dying, but that's illegal. Like,
mhm,
you're not gonna ask that of a medical professional. But what I did request very vigorously was morphine. And I am not gonna speculate why, that was put in the medical record, but it became clear to me that that was key into this, into
mhm,
why, I was under suspicion for homicide as was stated on the search warrant.
Mm.
mhm,
Um, but even so, again, knowing how I had acted legally leading up to my mom's death, I still held out hope that eventually my mom's cause of death would come through and that I would no longer be considered a suspect and I would be able to move forward with, taking care of my mom's estate. Because
Mhm.
if you're a suspect, you can't really move forward with life insurance. You can't move forward with, being the executor on the estate or any of that stuff.
Right.
Mhm.
Um, but unfortunately, that is not what happened. And just a few days before my birthday this year, I had posted a memorial about my mom and about the last birthday gift she'd ever given me, which was teaching me how to paint. My mom was an oil painter. And that was one of the last things I asked her for because it was one of the few gifts she could still give with dementia was to share her
Mhm.
knowledge with me.
Mhm.
And someone on Instagram under my post copy and pasted an indictment and said, "Shame on you for murdering your mother. This is why your family disowned you."
Oh my God.
With the full indictment number and 2 counts of murder, felony murder and malice murder. And in the state of Georgia, that is the harshest possible charge you can get. Malice murder is murder carried out with an abandoned and malignant heart. Um, so felony murder is someone dies during the commission of a felony. I It was so surreal to me that it part of my brain wanted to believe I was being scammed.
Mhm.
Like, there was some but I
And
also
at this point, you hadn't even heard this either, right? This
no,
was out of nowhere.
out of nowhere. And I sent it to the attorney who had consulted me, initially, when investigators first made contact or just before investigators first made contact. And I said, "Is this real? We can't find anything online." And he said, "Yes, it's real. There's been a warrant for your arrest for several weeks now.
What?
You need to immediately make arrangements to turn yourself in, and now is when you need to fight for your life." And, I I can't describe the terror
Yeah.
of what
Mhm.
ensued. I
Mhm.
lost 10 pounds in about 4 days.
Jeez.
Mhm.
You don't eat.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Um, you can't eat. You can't sleep. Um, Everything you thought you knew is just deteriorating. Like,
Mhm.
I had a cat that just been diagnosed with cancer, and all I could think is, "Oh my god, if I if I turn myself in and I don't make bond, he might die. Why am" it's just like your
Mhm.
brain goes everywhere.
Mm. Mhm.
What happens to my family? Like, never mind your job,
Mhm.
because you're definitely going to lose that once you get charged with murder. Um
Mm.
but I was really lucky that my attorney knew Brian Steele, who is an incredible and very nationwide renowned defense attorney, and he very eagerly took my
Mm.
case. And that was just a godsend. I had him in partnership with another amazing attorney, Pete Theodosian, who was local to Augusta, and they were so helpful and sort of holding my hand through the fear of
Mhm.
like, you have to be driven to Georgia to be turned in because you're a fugitive now. You know, you don't want law enforcement to catch you and end up like being held in Rikers or something
Jeez.
here. And so we made arrangements for me to turn myself in ahead of my bond hearing, which would be my first contact with the court. And I was driven down. Both my husbands drove me down, and we were really afraid. We didn't know if, it was our understanding the DA, who interestingly enough was not part of my indictment. She came on after. She was an interim DA. The original DA on the case, he had been called into like Army Reserve position up in DC. And so my case for the grand jury was handled by the investigator and not a DA.
Mm.
Hmm.
So the DA, she was very new to my case and didn't know too much about it, leading up to like right when I was indicted. And so we didn't have a lot of insight into whether she was going to, fight bond, but we knew that was typically the case is they fight bond. Um and in this county in Georgia, it's very conservative, and the odds of making bond after a murder charge are essentially nil. We couldn't
Mhm.
find any. And so walking into that jail was it's the black box of terror.
Yeah.
You don't know if you're ever going to get out, right?
Mhm.
Because there's a possibility that if things don't, pan out and you're not able to get sufficient evidence, like when someone's up against the state overwhelmingly, triumphs, whether that's through a plea deal or it's because someone has a court appointed attorney, and caseloads are high, the odds are not good. And
Mhm.
so, even though I had an amazing attorney, there is still this possibility of not making bond, of either waiting years for a trial, or not. And so it's quite a leap of faith,
Yeah.
to go in there and you hope that the people who show up for you are able to advocate enough that you're not a flight risk, right?
Right.
That you are willing to face this, and I certainly was, more than willing to face what I had been charged with.
Mhm.
And I was deeply fortunate in that I only spent 12 hours in jail. I still had to attend my bond hearing in my little orange jumpsuit,
Oh God.
extremely surreal. But my whole community in Augusta and even people flew in and drove in from out of town to show up for me and speak for me and to speak for the judge. Like, this woman is not going to run. She's deeply entwined with the
Mhm.
community. And they did. And I was very fortunate that the judge granted me $200,000 bond. It's astronomical, but um,
Mhm.
we were lucky enough that between like savings and retirement, we could cover the legal fees and the bond, but it clears you out.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
kind of it's what cost is your life?
Yeah.
And the answer is everything, right?
Mm.
Um, but we were then in a waiting game, but I was lucky in that I was free and able to get all the evidence I had, demonstrating that I did not, you know, commit any sort of crime,
Mhm.
to my attorney as well as, to the DA and the medical examiner. And after we presented the evidence we had, which we have reason to believe there was a great deal of context and perhaps even medical records that were not revealed, uh, the medical examiner himself changed my mom's cause of death
Mm.
from acute morphine overdose, homicide to undetermined. Um, on my mom's autopsy report, she had pneumonia in both lungs. She had brainstem atrophy. She had kidney and liver necrosis. She had
Mhm.
70% blockage of her arteries. She was 76 pounds. Um,
Hmm.
and she had a huge array of drugs in her system. Some were prescription, and some had even been administered from her hospitalization 2 days prior to her collapse. And in fact, we kept noticing in news articles that alleged that she had been injected with morphine, and we didn't know where that had come from. And it was probably because they found an IV line on her arm from her hospitalization. But a lot of confusion sort of proliferated around that
Mhm.
and how the determination was made. And postmortem morphine redistribution is a very tricky thing, right? And it is dependent on whether or not someone's having food or fluids. You need
Right.
a lot of medical context of what the
Mhm.
person's condition is before death to determine like how much morphine is going to concentrate in the body versus how much is excreted. And,
Mhm.
it is our understanding and belief that with this additional context, the medical examiner was able to, assess, "Ooh, maybe it's not a
My
morphine
God.
overdose here."
Jeez.
She's a hospice patient, we expect, and he even
Mhm.
said in his initial findings that they expect to see, morphine levels of varying degrees in people on hospice. And at that point, the state immediately dismissed all charges,
Mm.
right?
Wow.
It's not technically an exoneration because you don't go through a trial and are found guilty, but it's almost as though you go back to you're not even the suspect anymore. It's like it never happened. And
Except for it did.
and it did, exactly,
Oh
and
my
that's the thing,
God.
and it did,
Mm.
and then I realized, my God, if this happened to me, half of all Americans rely on hospice for their loved one at some point.
Yeah.
And I had spent years researching for a law that would have protected me and found nothing.
Wow.
Wow.
And I realized then that I had fallen into this no man's land, gray zone, in
Mhm.
which family caregivers and hospice, they rely on the trust system,
Yeah.
right? hospice providers trust families to not abuse these controlled substances,
Mhm.
and family members trust that no one is going to accuse them
Mhm.
of murder or implicate them because
Mhm.
there was not a direct accusation. There was just a lot of implication and allegations from hospice that I was trying to accelerate my mom's death, that I wanted to get rid of my mom,
Wow.
um,
Mhm.
which was really horrifying to
Mhm.
learn in the discovery,
Yeah. Jeez.
and to realize that there are instances in which advocacy can be mistaken for mistaken or misunderstood, and I'm very hesitant to assign malice anywhere because
Yeah.
it's just not. I don't like to speculate on other people's
Mhm.
motives. It's not a
Mhm.
responsible thing to do. But it was very clear that I was fundamentally misunderstood,
Yeah.
Mhm.
and that my intentions were fundamentally misunderstood, and perhaps even my mom's condition was misunderstood. Um, because there was no mention, during in any of the investigative in any of the documents that my mom had been actively dying or even that she had cancer.
Wow. Jeez.
I mean, huge information right there.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah. Wow. Oh my God.
Right.
What a story.
And, it's and so that is why I'm here now
Yeah.
talking to
mhm.
you guys, because if it could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. And what's more is that it's almost certain to happen to someone who does not have my
Yeah.
privilege,
Yeah.
either financially or in terms of legal understanding or in terms of meticulous documentation,
Mhm.
for them to be able to save their own lives
Yeah.
in the way
Mhm.
that I did.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And my hope is that A, I can raise awareness of, hey, this is a thing that can happen. But at the
Mhm.
same time, I don't want people to be afraid to administer comfort care to their loved ones, because you don't
Mhm.
want people dying in this, in agony in the way that I was watching my mom die in
Mhm.
agony because she didn't have
Mhm.
adequate, palliative medication, at least in my belief.
Mhm.
And I realized then there needs to be a law that really regulates the dispensing of these medications and how much is used and compared against, hospice providers, checking that off against what the family says they're administering and what's deemed appropriate. So a very clear record can be kept of what's being administered when and how and under what circumstances. Even though it's imperfect, it would at least enable some protection that basically goes three ways, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
If I had had that in place, it would have been clear there was no abuse of morphine.
Right.
There was no overdose. It was a barely used vial of
That's what
or
I was
bottle of
thinking.
morphine.
They should have seen that there it was probably almost full is what it
Yes,
sounds like, right?
yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and
Oh.
and at least when I handed over to investigators, it was certainly almost full,
Mhm.
and so that was also part of why I thought, "Oh, surely it's
Yeah.
gonna be clear,"
Right.
it's just like, um, sublingual morphine, which is, one of the most least potent ways to administer morphine because it's not super well absorbed under the tongue. Um, so it's sort of the low and slow approach, like, it's way easier to overdose somebody on a drip or
Yeah.
injection, and, but I realize that we need better protections so people feel like everything that they do is on the up and up and documented
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Right.
redundantly documented over and over so they
Right.
feel confident in administering these medications. Even with
Right.
training, they know that everyone is on the same page.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Oh, well, I'm just kind of
well,
stunned.
I am too, but I do wanna take this moment and say, I really honor this journey that you've been through, and
Yeah.
I want you to take a moment and breathe as well because has been a very traumatic story, lesson
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
it's so I honor that, and I if I were in the space with you, I'd be like, holding your hand for a second because 'cause I'm like, "Yeah, you
Wow.
have been through hell." Um,
And to come
yeah,
through it with this intention to really help others is just beautiful
yes.
and so appreciated. So
Well, and it also just makes me think, as much as I bemoan, like, these phones that everybody's, like, always documenting everything, like, Rachel, I am a lot like you. I am, like, such a little rule follower
Yeah.
and, like, tell everybody everything, and my kids are
Yes.
like, My
I'm
God,
the
who
world's
cares?
worst liar.
World's worst liar. Yes, I am too. But, in this situation, I really think that if there's any caveat that I might say, like, videotape everything you do,
Yes.
timestamp it,
And know the
show.
laws around party identification. Like in Georgia, voice recording, only one party has to know, but if it's video recording, both parties have to be aware.
All right.
It's good to inform that people of
Mhm,
that. I had recorded one of my conversations with a hospice nurse, and that was informed just in case. It's really important to know those laws as well. That way, if it never needs to be admitted in court, it's admissible.
Yeah, yeah, wow.
that's right.
Wow. Well, people who are taking care of their loved ones shouldn't have to be attorneys and,
No.
but that's
Yeah,
so good that you're thinking about this and creating a space for people to, or well, for this to be dealt with in the future. So, we've
Absolutely.
gone well over time, but that's fine because it's
Ooh,
been such a great conversation. So, um,
well, it's an important
yeah,
conversation for us too
absolutely.
to share with the world
Yeah.
that,
So I don't
we
think
need to be
most of
informed.
these things don't really even matter. But I guess we could, what do you think, Annalisa? Maybe just
Well, I would ask her how she's taking care of
yeah,
herself, how she's
that's
keeping herself
that's what I was
resourced,
thinking.
because that's
Yeah.
important.
yeah. I think of this part of the story as the good part. Um, I am able to have hope. In my wildest dreams, I get Marsha's law passed, right? And that would be enormously healing to be able to give my mom a legacy of potentially saving other
Mhm,
people's lives. Um, innocent family members as well as loved ones who need and deserve comfort care
Yeah.
and
mhm,
people, feeling that they can give that without fear of reprisal.
mhm.
Um, but how I stay resourced, I have an amazing community of people. Regularly I'm very social, so regularly have people over for gatherings. I'm also a huge gym rat. I'm very much into powerlifting and really focusing on, when you're a caregiver to someone with Alzheimer's and cancer, like your health just goes by the wayside. Like it is
Yeah.
nowhere near your top three priorities. And so,
Mhm,
since I lost my job and, kind of everything else, it's like, well, the thing I have to focus on now is advocacy, which is what I'm dedicating myself full time to now, as well as just my own health and getting myself as,
mhm,
resilient as I can possibly be for my future now. I'm in middle age. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, you got to really take care of things now.
Right.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and so that's really helpful. And I lean into gratitude a lot.
Mm, mhm.
Even through all this horror, I have never been bitter. I'm not really wired that way. I am immensely grateful for everyone in my life who showed
Mhm.
up for me and who was there for me and who, was willing to put their reputation on the line and, showing up in that courtroom or, speaking out for me. That meant the world to me. And I feel like I'm going to be paying that forward for the rest of my life. And
Mm.
so I think gratitude at the end of the day is what's really kept me going.
Yeah, that's great. That's so perfect, so important. Well, well, is there anything you wish we had asked you that we haven't gotten to?
Oh my gosh. I mean, um, you guys had great questions. I think that um, asking about who my mom was, it's because it's always great to be able to reflect on her in that way because
Yeah.
I didn't really get to grieve her. And I think maybe the grief is properly going to set in once I'm able to make
Mhm,
progress in her
mhm,
name.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
feel like
mhm.
you can close that chapter on that particular part of the grief. But,
yeah.
recalling who she was, it helps me because that's one of the first things you sort of get robbed of with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And it was also why I sent the book quote that I did.
Mhm,
So,
mhm. Yeah, that's great, and you did mention earlier that she was the one who ran the family, and, yeah, the engineer, and, oh my god, must have been an incredible person or I is an
Mhm.
incredible
She
person.
is an
Is
incredible
an incredible
person.
person, yeah,
Right,
as
'cause and she's also,
and she's still
part of
here, yeah,
Rachel.
she's still in there, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's
yeah.
wow, wow. Well, gratitude is a very good way to follow this and to end this, I think. Do you wanna read your quote, or do you want us to do that?
Yeah. I would actually love to read it because It's one of the very last things my mom, when she was still able to read, um, actually read to me aloud. My mom and I always had this thing. She was originally an English teacher before she was ever an engineer, and we're both love to read,
Mhm.
addicted to reading. We often, beautiful passages that would strike us in a book, we would just read aloud to each other.
Great.
And while she was still able to read, I actually have video of her reading this passage to me from The Moon Is Down, and it would always choke her up, and it chokes me up to this day. And it's John Steinbeck's The Moon Is Down. Do you have any context? The Nazis have invaded this small town in France that are resisting,
Mhm.
and the mayor of the town is basically being threatened and intimidated, with lighting this signal fire, saying, well, we will kill you and destroy everything if you don't stop these villagers from, rebelling against us, essentially. And he says to the Nazis, I have no choice of living or dying, you see, sir, but I do have a choice of how I do it. If I tell them not to fight, they will be sorry, but they will fight. If I tell them to fight, they will be glad. And I, who am not a very brave man, will have made them a little braver. Also one of my favorite lines, so,
Yeah.
and I try and live up to that, and my mom was the type of person who did too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, Rachel, you have no idea how you have spoken into my life today.
Yeah. Yeah. You really have really lifted us up.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, yeah, can't tell you how much we appreciate you and the work you're doing, and we
Mhm.
support you in any way.
Mhm. Keep in
Yeah,
touch.
keep in touch. We, if you've got something you want to, we'll definitely put your stuff in the podcast notes. But anything else that comes up, we have a newsletter that goes out. If you've got something special that you want people to know about, we'll do that once a month. So we'll be in touch.
Love it.
Thank you
Well,
again.
thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah.
All right.
Take care.
Have a wonderful day.
Yep. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Bye
Rachel.
bye. I got to just take some breaths. Wow.
I know. It's not just that, it's like,
Wow.
what an incredible I'm kinda speechless.
Yeah.
Like, I just think about Rachel, I think about her mom, I think about how we need to do better, and yet it's a lot of work to do better sometimes. We don't know what we're up against, in our communities, our families that could be, have issues with how we caregive,
Yeah.
our states.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Oh my
it's
God.
just it's
It's so
it's
hard.
a
It
lot.
is. Wow. What a brave, courageous person. And what an incredibly horrible
Mhm.
story to have to go through. And, hopefully people hearing this will know and advocate for this not happening to anybody else ever.
Well, this law,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And also holding, um, the space that people are going to do right,
yeah.
and this isn't happening all the time, but we just have to be very conscientious of how we go into this world, right?
Hmm.
Into the care of our loved ones, and, if there's Alzheimer in families, plan very
That
well.
helps.
It's
Yeah. It
important.
makes a huge difference. Yeah. Ah, well, much love. I'm going to turn this off. That was amazing.
The last conversations about the end of life.
Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to Charles Heaston, the composer of the original music you are listening to now.
And of course, thanks to you, our audience, and all of our amazing guests. Please come back next week for another great episode. Share this with your friends, family, and community. We hope you will subscribe and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, and Substack. Each guest's additional information will be found in the podcast notes. And of course, if you have a good end-of-life story to share, please reach out. We are always eager to hear from you.